So good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start. Thank you for joining us for this monthly CPR-CSH seminar about urban matters. So today we are glad we welcome Aishwarya Tipnis, which is who has one feet in the research because she's currently visiting at the Faculty of SPA, and she also owns her own practices, and she's the lead architect in a company which is specialized about heritage matters in urban design. So today she's going to present a case study about everyday conservation, and I hope she will give us a lot of detail about the difference between monuments, because we are here in Delhi very used to see a lot of monuments, but maybe we are less aware about train station, parks, and all these everyday life amenities that requires actually some conservation.
Thank you. I didn't know really what we should focus on, so I'm just going to share my journey with a particular town called Chandan Nagar in West Bengal. I've been associated with this particular project for almost 7 years now. And although the case study is focused on Chandan Nagar, it's very relevant for almost all of India. It's like a symptomatic case study. So I'd like to start by basically the simple question about what is heritage, because when I ask, whenever I'm speaking to diverse groups, whether they are students of architecture or general public, the question when we say what is heritage, the most common images are those which are of monuments such as the Taj Mahal or any other temples down south, Ajanta, Ellora. So the common perception, or so to say the stereotype that we associate with the word heritage, is mostly about monuments. Although monuments have been in our they are a part of our urban fabric, but the concept of conservation of monuments is really something that is a British contribution to our society, having with the Archaeological Survey of India established as late as 1861. However, when we talk about urban heritage, now what is the difference between heritage of monuments and urban heritage? I would like to say that urban heritage is a rather nascent field in India. It's the first the first movements of urban heritage began only in the late 1980s, and it's only in 1995 that we actually get the first listing of heritage buildings in India in Mumbai. So today, from 1995 to today, in the last 20 years, the concept of urban conservation and urban heritage has also undergone many changes. Today, we recognize urban heritage as not just the static built environment, but everything else that goes with it. It's about a way of life. It's about the tangible as well as the intangible that gives a particular place its sense of identity. So today we have gone beyond the field of building into fields, parallel fields of architecture, urban design, intangible, landscape, placemaking. All of that is now encompassed under what we are calling urban heritage. So today when we look at urban heritage, we are looking at everything which is settlements and its response to nature. So places like Jaisalmer that developed many centuries ago, and the way they did their urban morphology, their response to the sun, natural resources, all of that is now encompassing within what we call as urban heritage. Similarly, the streets, the squares, the kind of the people and their relationship with those spaces, as well as the livelihoods that were generated within those spaces, all of that is important to us when we are discussing urban heritage. So just to explain it a little bit, so this is a image of Jodhpur, and the way the morphology of the settlements, the way these havelis are placed next to each other, their response to climate, all of this is now under the, we look at it from the sustainability aspect as well as from the urban heritage perspective. Again, acknowledging the dynamic, it's something that has only come up very recently in 2010, and further got validated with the historic urban landscape approach of UNESCO in 2011, where we are now looking at people, their relationships, spaces, culture, and change. Again, today we are looking at the dynamism and the livelihoods and the economic aspect of heritage, which is beyond the buildings, which is what makes the place sort of come alive. So, the point really is that when everything is heritage, then how do you deal with it? One approach is not enough. Of course, there, like I said, in the last 20 years, there have been many approaches, and the current approach of the historic urban landscape approach, which looks at the settlement with various layers of morphology, geology, dynamism, is all coming together and as a way of looking at urban heritage. Now, I'm going to start the case study on Chandan Nagar, which is, like I said, we've been working on this project for about 7 years now, and why I call it the heritage of the ordinary is because it is this, apart from monuments, it's these settlements and houses of everyday people like you and me that are now come within what we are considering urban heritage. So how do we deal with something like that? So, just a little bit of background about Chandan Nagar. So, Chandan Nagar lies about 40 kilometers north of Calcutta, and it's a very interesting sort of way it. This is Calcutta here, which was the British outpost, and similarly, on just within 40 kilometers from Calcutta, there was a Danish settlement at Serampur. There was the French settlement at Chandernagore. There was the Dutch settlement at Chinsura, and there was a Portuguese settlement at Bandel. Now, this is also because in the 17th century, these were the most prosperous trading ports along the Hooghly River, and there was a lot of wealth that was generated in this particular region. And this area is also fondly known as Europe on the Ganges, because nowhere in the world do you have these kind of trading posts right next to each other. As well, it's been recognized as a potential of becoming a World Heritage Site for its unique sort of character. However, having said that, there was a committee that was set up about 5 years ago looking at potential World Heritage Sites, and when this site was put up, they said that there is a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of things lacking, because they said it's just not possible to do this. So, which also brings us to the point as to when we are so fragmented in the way we look at a cultural landscape, and there are many things which are missing that don't allow us to work with urban heritage the way we should be. So this is just a glimpse of what these settlements were. If you look on the left, this is a hotel. This is what was the Hotel de France. This was a very posh sort of French hotel, which is now converted into the court. These are images of what the trade on the Hooghly River used to be like, and you had all these mansions that overlooked the river. So the idea is that it's been recognized as being a unique cultural landscape because it's a testimony to a confluence of cultures. Many people have said that the contemporary Bengali culture is actually a fusion of European and Bengali culture put together, and that has its roots over here. The tangible influence has been seen in the form of architecture, town planning, literature, art, etc. Again, this region was where industrialization began in India, because it was here that a lot of these jute mills were set up, and each of these jute mills had like a sister concern in England and Scotland. So the names of those jute mills still continue, like Angus Jute Works and Caledonian Jute Works, etc. And then there is a intermingling of cultures that you will see. So it's neither it's not like Pondicherry where you have like a white town and a black town and a French town and a native town. It's here in this because this was really built on trade. So you see a lot of mixing of ideas, a mixing of architectural expressions in the way these buildings were built. So this is just a glimpse of what the kind of tangible built fabric is, and it's important here for me to say that unlike other settlements, whether we look at the indigenous settlements or the medieval ones, where you have some monumental buildings, either there'll be a fort or a palace or a temple or something. Chandanagar is a trading town. It was built as a trading town, so all what comes together is these nondescript buildings that come together and form an ensemble. So it's not about having one particular monument, it's not about having one grand building, but it's about having many that come together as a collective. The first the project actually if, is something that was actually initiated by a voluntary sector, and the story is a little something that I really like to share. Is I set up my when I was setting up my practice, I had this opportunity from the French government. I had a scholarship to go to France and meet with like-minded people and some organizations. And in Paris, I met with Via Maison Francais, who said to me that we are looking at doing something in Chandanagar. There's everything has been about Pondicherry in India, and we've heard that there is this settlement. Can you help us? And I was like, yes, I can help you. So they said, okay, let's start with putting a listing together. So as an initiative of Via Maison Francais and the French Heritage in India Society, which was which was just being set up by Francis Vaxier of the Nimrana Group and the Embassy of France in India. The first project was initiated in 2010-11, and the idea was to identify what is the heritage of Chandanagar, because we had it was it's very important to also understand the history of Chandanagar, was because with the French and the British wars, and finally the French were left with 5 settlements in India. It was Pondicherry, Chandannagar, Yanam, Mahe, and Karyakal. However, at the time of Indian independence in 1947, Chandanagar voted to be part of India, and it was the only settlement that was transferred to India before the others. The others came into India in 1954, and therefore they became the Union Territory of Pondicherry. However, Chandanagar was merged with the state of West Bengal. As a result of which, and the political situation that followed, Chandannagar sort of went into the back waters. People forgot about it, and whenever there was focus on French architecture or French culture, everything was focused on Pondicherry. So the impetus of this project was really to put Chandannagar back on the map, and as a result, and while if you look at the history also, first Chandanagar was a more important port than Pondicherry when it began, and then it becomes the second important town, and then when Calcutta becomes even more supreme, it starts relegating itself. So therefore there was not much written about it. We didn't there were a lot of books that we found in India that were written about Pondicherry, but very few that were about Chandanagar. There are still a lot of scholars who are continuing to do research on the history and heritage of Chandanagar. So when we started in 2010, about 7 years ago, we could look at these archival maps and try and figure out what existed before. Having put that together, we adopted a sort of an urban level approach to first understanding the settlement before pinpointing which buildings we wanted to list. So the objective was to come up with a list of heritage buildings, but we couldn't have done that without looking at it as an ensemble, because as I said, it wasn't about monumental great pieces of architecture, but it was about how the collective came together. So in this case, I'd like to point out that this is the river Hooghly, which forms a crescent here, and this was the fort that was built by the French. And then later, when with the French and the British fighting each other, the fort was destroyed by Robert Clive. And then again, the settlements kept changing hands between French and the British until it became a French settlement finally. And what is interesting over here is to see the urban design was actually what was most important in this particular settlement, because you have this key that is formed and you have a promenade that they built at the time. Most of the streets were at gridiron. This was the GT road, which was the main commercial spine that was connecting it to Calcutta. So a lot of the heritage was not just in the buildings but also in the morphology, in the planning of the city, in the urban design. So we looked at first our first job was really to document the urban level analysis. So if you can see the photograph below, this is how it used to be. This was always designed to be that strand and the promenade. This is where the fort is, and today this is the extent of Chandan Nagar, and this is the river. Very recently, I got so Chandan Nagar is in Bengali. It's Nagar, which means the moon and the town of the moon. So that the moon is coming from the crescent that the river is taking. So it's actually Nagar, and that's how we are spelling it. It's because of the crescent of the moon that this town settles on. Very recently, in April, in fact, I was in Bordeaux and looking at the World Heritage Site in Bordeaux. And the World Heritage Site in Bordeaux has a very similar plan, and it's called Porte de la Lune. And it's exactly a similar crescent and a similar urban design. So we can there's of course a lot of scope for research to be done on what the relationship between the two towns was, how come they had such a similar sort of layout, and we don't know all that because that kind of a research has not been done yet, but it's something that is interesting to pick up on. The second thing was, again, we did a whole lot of analysis on the urban design and the architectural layout, the streetscapes, the open spaces and nodes, the key views and vistas. We looked at what kind of buildings existed: public, institutional, military, industrial, tomb, cemetery, all of that to come up with this list. A lot of the buildings were drawn up using measured drawings of the streetscapes, as well as an inventory of each and every building that we thought of value was put together, which recorded its history, its architecture, its construction system, and its description, and why we thought it had some sort of a value. So again, this is just a compilation of the kind. So once we identified the buildings, we went a little further and did some more analysis of what is the kind of buildings that were emerging. So there was the typical French garden house. There was the Indo-French townhouse, where you had, like I said in the first go, that there was an amalgamation of Indian and European aesthetics that was happening in the buildings of Chandernagore. So in this particular case, although the building facades have got completely European features, on the inside you have a courtyard and you have a Thakur Dalan, which is basically the puja ghar, or where the temple, the family deity stays there. And it's very interesting to see that out of the courtyard, 3 elevations had the colonial sort of Corinthian columns and semicircular arches, whereas the elevation that had the family temple had these multifoliated Hindu or Mughal sort of arches. So there was this amalgamation even within each house, that there was this melange of Indian and European aesthetics happening within the same sort of space. Again, we put together like a portfolio of the kinds of openings and different kinds of gates, different kinds of, and then we also looked at what was the sort of intangible that existed within the town. So on the left, this is a typical fish-shaped bread that was being made in Chandernagore by this bakery called Das Bakery. This is a photograph of a lighting installation that is done for the Durga Puja Pandal, again using the Eiffel Tower. There are many homes which have really old French furniture, if you see the images below, as well as paintings and things like that. So at one point of time, like I said, it was a very rich mercantile economy, and there were these merchants, and in their houses they had the best of things brought in. Some of the houses even had ballrooms with Burma teak floors, large chandeliers, which are in a state of dereliction, but they did exist, which point to a fact that at some point of time this was a really rich sort of settlement. again, looking at what the intangible is, this is a typical art called the Chandan Nagar lighting, which they do in which has now become very famous, but it belongs to sort of Chandan Nagar. And Chandan Nagar is also very famous for the nationalist movement in India. Aurobindo Ghosh was from Chandan Nagar, and it is from here that he went to Pondicherry and then set up the ashram in Pondicherry. He took refuge in Chandan Nagar, hid there in the house of one of the revolutionaries, Motilal Roy. There are also a lot of other freedom fighters like Kanailal Datta, who was studying in Chandan Nagar, and there are a lot of legends that go around of how they would make bombs in Chandan Nagar, go and blast them in British India and run into the gates because this was French and they were completely immune. So there is a lot of pride in these stories that the people take, that there was something that they were different from the rest of the hinterland, and they were on their own. It was so having put all of that together, the step was to, now we had come up, the study had told us, okay, there are all these great things about the heritage, the architecture, the urban design. So really very excited, and that put together the next step of valorizing this heritage. So we put together the typical methodologies that are used by ECOMOS in using a value-based assessment and trying to put together what kind of criteria. So just a little overview of how heritage works in our country is, mostly built heritage can be categorized into two. One is monuments and one is urban heritage. Monuments are generally either nationally protected, which is by the Archaeological Survey of India, or they are state protected. So the ones which are most important across the country, landmark value, are protected nationally under the central government with the Archaeological Survey of India, and the locally important monuments are generally protected under the state government, and they have their different acts under the State Department of Archaeology. Urban heritage is basically classified as listed buildings and heritage precincts. Mostly these are under the State, Town and Country Planning Acts, and it is the prerogative of the municipalities to protect these kind of ordinary sort of buildings which are non-monumental. So this is a system that works almost pan-India, and this is how, so when we look at the heritage that we found in Chandan Nagar, it was actually coming under the second category of urban heritage. Like I said, that there weren't any great grand monuments. So we were looking at listing these buildings under the listed under the local acts. Now, our study had come up with 99 buildings of heritage value and 4 heritage precincts. At the moment, there was one building which was the French Institute, which was the house of Francois Dupleix, the general in the French army, who was responsible for bringing Chandernagore to its zenith, which is converted into a museum and protected under the Archaeological Survey of India as a centrally protected monument. The state protects 5 other buildings, which is the subdivisional court, the clock tower and jail, the St. Joseph's Convent, and the Liberty Gate. So in the case of West Bengal, the act is a little different, because West Bengal is one of the very few states that has a state legislation for protecting urban heritage. This is under the West Bengal Heritage Commission that was set up in 2001. So under the State Government Act, these 5 extra buildings were protected. However, we had found 99 buildings, and we sent our listing to all departments of government of West Bengal to protect them. And that was 2010, and we are in 2017. And now 5 more buildings are in process of finding their way onto the list. These are Chandanagar College, Sacred Heart Church, Kananal Vidya Mandir, which is a school, a welfare department, and Rakshit Bhavan. Now, the learning from this particular slide was that when we as professionals, whether it's INTAC or whether it is, us as professionals going out into the field and trying to identify which buildings are of heritage value, we did the entire study. But when it came to notification, the government looked at, is there any dispute? Is it easy? Is it, do they have any land issues? Is it in a good condition or a bad condition? So out of 99, they only chose 5 other buildings to add onto the list. Everything else, they ruled it out on some of the other bases. Like, we were very keen to protect one building called the French Registry, which was one of the oldest buildings in Chandan Nagar, which was declared unsafe for habitation, but can easily be sort of restored. And they refused to protect it, saying that it's in a very bad condition, so we cannot protect it. So somewhere we know that there are mechanisms for protection, but again, there is a huge gap there at some point, because what we so our whole agenda of the Chandanagar listing was to say that there are so many buildings we want to list because we are trying to protect an ensemble. Again, if we start picking and choosing 4 or 5 buildings, we are going back to the monument sort of approach, which is going to have an adverse effect on the very heritage we are trying to protect. So, what was happening as a result of which, because of no protection on ground, there was piecemeal development happening. The photograph that you see here is one of the oldest French houses in Chandanagar called Dayal Manzil. This has been sold to a developer. So there were local people who would call us and say that this building is going and that building is going. The photographs on the left are of buildings that were on our 99 list but were demolished subsequently because there was no protection for them, and the family had decided to sell it to a developer. So again, if you see the building on the bottom right, I told you about the fish shaped bread. This was made in this iconic bakery called the Das Bakery, which was again demolished, and a new high rise is going to come over here. Again, this is a bungalow which was again probably partitioned, so half of it remains and half of it has become a housing complex. This was the original post office, which has again been partly demolished to make a marriage hall. So the point is that we felt that as academics, as professionals, we have so much, we feel that this heritage is so important, but clearly it's not as important to the people who are living there or who are even considering it as heritage. This is another view that I'll show you. So from that ensemble value, piece by piece, this is the kind of development that is emerging. So from a streetscape that was like that, you have all these sort of buildings that are emerging. So there is nothing left of the ensemble value, and it's happening at a really rapid pace. So when we think about, okay, so what is heritage conservation got to do with all of this? Conservation is mostly understood. I mean, the definition of conservation really, it's like a 5 step process. Although we have to preserve things, we have to restore them, we could add or subtract or do some sort of an infill development. That's how we understand conservation. However, the government understands conservation to be only protection and preservation, which means that if you look at any of the central government act of the Archaeological Survey of India or the state government acts which are following it, it's about prevention. They just put a circle around a heritage building and say 100 meters no development, 200 meters regulated development. So, and that's like a blanket law for all kinds of heritage across the country. So it has got nothing to do with what is your sense of character, what is the heritage even about. If it's a fort or an archaeological site, a temple, a house, the law is the same for everybody. So that is the current approach to monuments. Now, why I am talking about this is because, like I said, for us in Chandanagar, this act was not going to work because what we were trying to protect was the ensemble value. And although the West Bengal Heritage Commission has within its legislation the provision to protect an entire area as a precinct, that's something that was not taken up. Okay, now coming back to conservation, like I said, we understand conservation as preservation. That's what happens to most of our monuments. But if you look back, the traditional concept of conservation in India has been continuity. You look at any of the temples or any of the spaces or any of these settlements that I was talking about, the historic settlements, it's always been about caring, maintaining, renewing, adding, subtracting. Everything has been, it's about taking care and changing as per the needs of the time. Now, while and that's why I started my talk by saying that we've adopted this whole preservation of monuments approach with the British in 1861 and forgotten our very own indigenous approach of allowing change. So we've gone from being a society that allowed and changed and made sure that our heritage remained relevant to us, to a society that says don't touch, leave it as it is. And that has really impacted the way our urban fabric is changing at this point of time. So today, when we are talking about conservation, it's mostly become conservation versus development. If you see the photograph below, this is Mumbai. The sloping roofs are of the mill lands and of all the heritage buildings. Here you have a flyover that is cutting through them, and you have all these high real estate development that is happening around it. So in our present urban conservation discourse in the country, we are not looking at development as a part of conservation, but we are looking at as a conservation and development as two parties on either side of the table. However, today when we look at the urban policies or international policies, everybody is talking about heritage as a driver and enabler of sustainability, heritage as a starting point of development. And so now that it's been recognized as one of the SDGs, there is a need to change the way we look and address heritage in our country. Now, coming back to Chandan Nagar, so even in 2010, when we prepared the first report, we sort of put together the whole agenda was to develop a plan for sustainable urban development with heritage as the driver. So we looked at what our challenges were. Our challenges were dereliction and degradation of the built fabric due to lack of repair, maintenance, and appreciation, impoverishment and lack of employment opportunities, poor levels of hygiene and sanitation, and lack of basic infrastructure, lack of appreciation of ecology and connection with the river. Garbage was thrown along the entire river, and artists and creative industries were completely isolated, and the economy was supported by very small businesses. So this is something that we had identified in 2010, and we had also looked at what the opportunities were. So in this case, the opportunity was a strong cultural identity, unique blend of Indo-European architecture, tangible and intangible heritage of significance, a unique ecological relationship with the river, and connection with other European settlements such as Sirampur, Chinsura, Barakpur, and Calcutta by the river. Now there was an initiative by the West Bengal Tourism to create like a tourism circuit or a tour along the river to each of these settlements. I think there was some kind of funds which were being allocated to developing this whole area as a tourism circuit. And then there were these cultural tourism opportunities by bringing the tangible and intangible together. So our whole objective of the project was to protect, conserve, and improve Chandan Nagar, its unique confluence of French and Bengali cultures, and to promote the local arts and crafts for sustainable development of the town. What happens at the moment is, although it was a self-sustainable town for almost 300 years, today most of the population is a service class population that takes the train and goes to Calcutta to do their jobs in the morning and comes back in the evening. There are hardly any people other than students and women in the town during the day. So its self-sustainability, because of the way it was located and because it was cut off from rest of British mainland, it had its own economic opportunities, it has its own school and colleges, it had its own employment opportunities, it had its mills and things like that. So today all of that has been taken away and it's become like a satellite town just because it's easily connected to Calcutta. And the piecemeal development is also happening because it's easily accessible by the train. So people are more migrants are coming, and these houses are being demolished and converted into flats to suit this new migrant sort of population. Again, so when we look at sustainable development, there are three sort of large players, with being the government, local and state, professionals, and civil society. So what I want to talk about next is having done the top-down approach, having done the listing, having tried with the government of getting them to recognize and see our point of view, we realized that the government in this case can only do so much. The problem basically was that the people and the community didn't really think too much of its own heritage, because they saw themselves as sort of colonial cousins to Calcutta, and Calcutta was great, their Victoria Memorial was great, but what did they have in their town? Theirs was a regular sort of ordinary town just off Calcutta, those sort of things. So About 5 years later, 2015, we launched another project, which was again an initiative from the voluntary sector. We had a seed funding from VMSO Francais, and to be very honest, I think it was out of frustration that this project was launched, that nothing was happening. Even after having made this, this urban area appraisal and made all this listing, having sent it to all the government departments, and nothing being moved, I think it was more out of frustration that we decided, okay, now we'll go the other way, and we'll do something bottoms up so that people get sort of aware of their heritage and they start sort of getting empowered to take care of it. So in 2015, we launched something which is called the Heritage and People of Chandan Nagar project, where we wanted to hear from the citizens what they really thought of the town, and we were pleasantly surprised because the people were very proud of their heritage. It was just and they were very, but they felt that their hands were tied. It wasn't as if they didn't care about their heritage, which is why they were selling off their houses. It was just that they didn't have a choice because there were no employment opportunities. There was they were just, they had no sort of option left. So we through the project we spoke to a lot of people what they thought about their town. We did a lot of workshops. We even engaged with the school children and the youth of the town in through innovative platforms, like here in this case on Independence Day in 2015 we did like an open house where on the strand we just set up a stall, and we designed this game called like a treasure hunt of heritage in Chandan Nagar, and we invited children and passers-by to come and play with us and learn about the heritage of. And this kind of an activity was they were very participative. They came forward, they played, they asked a lot of questions. And another thing we did is we involved the local students of history and who came forward and worked with our project as citizens historians. So the idea was that they go home to home through their own network and collect stories, because there were still a lot of people who remembered Chandanagar from the French times, and there were these stories that were just locked up in people's houses. And what the project enabled was for these young people to go and interact with their grandparents, the friends of their grandparents, to find out what the town was like. And it was very encouraging because a group of these citizens historians came back and told us that this was the most exciting summer we've had. We learned so many stories, and finally history is making sense to us. So all of this was put into an archive, and then we did a lot of sort of innovative competitions with the community, different kinds of competitions. This one was we asked them to do a Franco Bangla cooking competition, where they had to sort of invent a recipe which was a mixture of French and Bengali cuisine, and most of the ladies of the town were very enthusiastic about it, and they came and participated. Again, there was like a photography workshop and walk that we had organized for people to come and look at the heritage. Now there was a learning here. These sort of things, when they're done in Delhi, are very, very successful. A lot of people come for it, but hardly anybody came. If you see the picture below, most of the seats were empty because the people, the community didn't think it was very valuable. Photography workshop, and there were certain things that we sitting in Delhi assume that will happen, like we wanted people to Instagram, and we wanted people to do Facebook and upload pictures of heritage. They didn't do it. They just didn't do it. They didn't think it was important enough for them to do it. Then again, but the citizens historians, which were about a bunch of 10 kids who were studying in Calcutta, in Chandanagar, some were from Presidency, some from JNU, some from, who all came through a call for applications that we put on the Facebook page of the project, and they all came forward to work on this project voluntarily. We helped them, handheld them in creating like a trail of from the history that they collected, and then trained them to take these heritage walks on their own. Now, it became such a success that this year in July, the French ambassador went to Chandanagar, and one of these citizens historians actually took him and his family along the tour of Chandanagar, and he liked it so much that he tweeted about it. So the point is that the work that these kids were doing in collecting their own history not only build a sense of pride in them, but also the spreading the message of the that importance of their own heritage definitely came across. This is another picture of how that heritage walk was designed, and these kids were taking it. And what we did is we also gave all the citizens historians then put up all the stories that they found through this project onto a blog, the Heritage and People of Chandanagar blog. So they talked about the families that they had discovered. So here there's one blog on Chandanagar's famous son Durga Charan Rakshit. Then this is about the Nilkanteshwari temple, which is again a mixture of Indian and European aesthetics. There's a blog about the Das bakery. There's a blog about the Mondal family. There's a dog. And then we started getting requests from people, diaspora, who had moved out of Chandanagar. So here is a story from an Australian gentleman who had some ancestors who were in Chandanagar at one point of time, and he had come looking for their graves, and then he came across somebody who told them about this project. Then he sent us an email, and then he wrote out a chronicle for us about what he had heard about Chandanagar and what he found and things like that. Again, we talked about a lot of social institutions. So, in all, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of pride was renewed and a lot of information was shared through the digital community on the heritage in building sort of pride. Now, we took this a step further. We had, like I said, some amount of seed funding from the foundation VMF, and all these citizen historians were then sort of given felicitated by giving them certificates and prizes, and then what happened is that we put all of this on a website, the heritagechandanagar.com, which is an open source GIS mapping for identification of buildings of heritage value. This was again because we figured out that all the list of 99 buildings that we had created in 2010 was just lying on people's tables and never opened. So we decided to put it onto a website so that everybody had access to it. Next time anything happened, they would all be aware of it. The second thing we did here was we developed the technology for crowdsourcing memories of people who are from Chandanagar, not in Chandanagar, in America. We received a lot of entries from the diaspora who had moved away to America and sent a lot of videos and photos. And we are trying to keep this spirit alive on social media. And just to sort of wrap up, so that was 2015. Now we're in 2017, and we're taking that a step further. And as part of Boju India this year, we are having a co-creation workshop in January 2018, which is about placemaking, citizens empowerment, and partnership between institutions. So we have a partnership that has been forged between Jadavpur University, Confluence, Chandanagar College, and IIM Nagpur, where we are going to talk about public spaces, people, placemaking, as well as public art in public spaces, and economics, because IIM Nagpur has come on board. We're going to talk about the economic angle of how heritage can bring about sustainable development. This is going to happen in the second week of January 2018, and we are in the middle of curating that. And lastly, the whole point of this entire project after 7 years is to develop a showcase through Boju India of how heritage can pay for itself. So we're launching a project which is called as the House of the Moon project. This is the registry building that I'm talking about, which has been condemned for demolition. So through the Boju India project, what we are trying to say is that this can be restored, it can be put to community use, and so we are looking at running a campaign of for crowdfunding for heritage conservation for this particular building. Again, the objective is collaboration, co-creation, and bringing in as many people on board from within the town and from outside to work for its heritage. I think I'd like to sum up by saying that when we started the project in 2010, if there were like 7 or 8 people that were proud of their heritage, today, 7 years later, everybody is excited that this co-creation workshop is coming into town. There are so many people who have volunteered to be part of the workshop, help out as volunteers, and I think there has been a little change in the way people thought about their own towns now, and their pride is now coming across in they want to host events, they want to host these students into their houses as homestays when they come. So I think just to sort of sum up, so this was our journey, which is very far from over. It's just beginning really, but it's been 7 years, and I think, like I said initially, this is just symptomatic of what can happen in all of India, because the stories are very similar. It's about how heritage can be made relevant to us today. And if we are able to mainstream that, then a lot of our, fighting for heritage conservation would become much easier in urban context. Thank you.